the attic, among boxes of forgotten possessions, I found remnants of past generations who had struggled under the same unseen dominion. Clothing, toys, and keepsakes bore traces of human attachment, yet also whispered of neglect and concealment. Some items had been hidden deliberately, others preserved carefully, each reflecting an intimate negotiation with the object's authority. The act of storing or discarding objects became a form of compliance or rebellion, demonstrating how even mundane choices were permeated with the heirloom's subtle governance. The attic was a space of memory and secrecy, echoing the quiet power the object wielded over lives long past. Descending into the cellar, I felt the cool air wrap around me, heavy with the scent of earth and time. The space was not just utilitarian, but symbolic, reinforcing the object's omnipresence even in the most private and practical areas of the house. Supplies were stored with the same attention to hierarchy and protocol that characterized the upper floors. The placement of barrels, shelves, and containers followed patterns that reflected status, responsibility, and oversight. Even labor was imbued with ritualistic care, ensuring that the heirloom's authority touched every facet of domestic and logistical life. As the day wore on, I reflected on how the heirloom had become a measure of morality, success, and worth within the family. Its influence shaped not just external behavior, but internal thought, creating a pervasive sense of obligation, fear, and ambition. Decisions were rarely made in isolation. Every action considered the potential judgment of both the object and the lineage it represented. The heirloom had created a closed loop of reinforcement, where expectation, observation, and consequence intertwined to maintain its power across generations. In essence, it had become the family's invisible law, a guiding principle no less potent than any written code or formal decree. Finally, as twilight approached, I retraced my steps through the house, noting the interplay of light and shadow across the heirloom and the rooms it governed. Each space seemed to respond differently, yet consistently, to the presence of the object. The living quarters with tension and ritual, the study with calculation and deliberation, the hallways and common spaces with hierarchy and observation. The house itself, once merely a structure of walls and floors, had become an instrument of influence, reflecting and amplifying the power of a single object. In every crevice, every shadow, the heirloom's authority was evident, shaping not only the present moment, but the memory and anticipation of what was to come. As I stepped outside into the cooling evening, I looked back at the house, now fully aware of the extent of its silent dominion. The heirloom remained, as it had for centuries, a force both subtle and absolute. Its presence continued to orchestrate lives, relationships, and decisions, reminding me that sometimes power need not be violent or visible to be complete. In the quiet twilight, the house stood as a testament to this truth, a monument to the enduring influence of an object whose weight extended far beyond its material form, embedding itself deep within the soul of a family that could never truly escape it. Night had settled like a heavy curtain over the estate, and the silence seemed to hum with anticipation. The house, already steeped in history, now exuded an almost sentient presence. Every floorboard groaned in subtle protest, and the shadows of the furnishings twisted unnaturally in the dim candlelight. In this stillness, it became impossible to ignore how the heirloom's legacy had bled into the very architecture. Each doorframe, banister, and ceiling beam seemed to whisper reminders of obedience and vigilance, echoing the invisible authority that had governed generations. I paused in the hallway, feeling the weight of history pressing down, and realized that every corner of this place was imbued with stories of silent suffering, quiet victories, and unspoken rivalries, all somehow traced back to the singular object at the center of it all. In the parlor, the remaining family members gathered, their expressions a mixture of reverence and apprehension. Age had done little to diminish the tension in their postures, the careful way they placed hands on chairs, how they spoke in measured tone. The heirloom had instilled habits that no one consciously acknowledged, yet all instinctively followed. Conversations avoided direct mention of the object, but it remained the unifying force around which all dialogue revolved. Opinions were cautiously phrased, jokes carefully measured, and laughter, when it appeared at all, was hesitant, tempered by years of silent rules and expectations. In this room, the heirloom was less a possession than a ruler, a monarch whose decrees were absolute and unquestioned. Ascending to the upper floor, the private chambers revealed the deep psychological grip the heirloom had maintained. Diaries, letters, and personal trinkets told stories of fear and aspiration entwined. Children had learned early to equate compliance with safety and rebellion with disaster, often internalizing these lessons before they fully understood them. The journals spoke of sleepless nights and whispered arguments, of dreams deferred and ambitions quietly reshaped, all under the invisible supervision of the object. Even intimate relationships were shaded by its presence, with affection, rivalry, and loyalty constantly weighed against the perceived expectations the heirloom imposed. It became clear that the object had transcended physicality, becoming a psychological framework that dictated behavior long after direct observation was no longer necessary. The attic offered further insight, a repository of secrets, both trivial and profound. Boxes held remnants of past lives, forgotten toys, letters, and ceremonial objects, each marked with a sense of importance dictated by the heirloom. Some items were meticulously preserved, while others were hastily concealed, a silent testament to the duality of reverence and fear that the object, the very act of hoarding or discarding, was an expression of obedience or defiance, a microcosm of the behavioral control that extended to every other aspect of life within the estate. Dust and decay covered some artifacts, yet even in neglect, their stories continued to resonate, silently reinforcing the lessons ingrained by the object's enduring presence. Down in the kitchen, the routines of sustenance took on a ritualistic air. The family and staff executed their tasks with a precision that betrayed the subtle, pervasive pressure of the air. Cooking, cleaning, and even the arrangement of dishes were conducted with an awareness that each action might reflect upon the object, on the family's legacy, and on the delicate balance of favor and disfavor it seemed to confer. Meals were more than nourishment, they were performances, displays of competence, attention, and loyalty. Even the mundane rhythms of daily life were transformed into lessons in vigilance and self-regulation, a constant reminder that the heirloom's influence extended into every decision, no matter how minor. The study remained the locus of strategy and decision-making, where the heirloom's authority was both most explicit and most subtle. Ledgers, letters, and legal documents formed a latticework of influence, each entry an extension of the objects. Even choices that seemed personal were made within a framework constructed by the object's long-standing dictates. Financial transactions, estate planning, and family governance were conducted with a consciousness that their alignment with the heirloom's perceived will was paramount. Here, the intersection of power, obedience, and manipulation was most apparent, revealing a dynamic that had persisted through generations and shaped the trajectory of the family's fortunes and misfortunes alike. As midnight approached, I found myself in the grand hall once more, the flickering candlelight revealing the depth of the heirloom's. The portraits of ancestors seemed almost animate in the dim glow, their gazes judging, guiding, and reminding those present of the unbroken chain of expectation. The house itself had become an instrument, its corridors and rooms, structured, but reinforced compliance, its shadows and sounds mediating interaction and dictating behavior. Every family gathering, every discussion, every decision had been, and continued to be, subtly orchestrated by the invisible hand of the heirloom. It was no longer simply a relic, it was a lens through which all experience was filtered, shaping perception, thought, and action. In reflection, it became evident that the heirloom's power was both enduring and transformative. It had managed to convert objects, spaces, and even relationships into conduits of authority. The family's identity, morality, and sense of self had been inexorably tied to it, shaping generations in ways that were simultaneously protective and confining. The legacy of fear, respect, and obsession it inspired had created patterns of behavior that perpetuated themselves independently of direct oversight. Even in moments of defiance, the object's shadow loomed, a silent arbiter of consequences and reward, of memory and anticipation. Stepping outside into the crisp night air, I looked back at the house, sensing the full magnitude of its silent dominion. The heirloom remained at the heart of the family's experience, its presence subtly but powerfully orchestrating every aspect of life, thought, and memory. Its influence extended beyond physical form into the deepest recesses of psyche and spirit. As the wind whispered through the trees surrounding the estate, I realized that this single object, so easily overlooked by an outsider, had wielded control over generations, teaching lessons, shaping destiny, and leaving a legacy that would endure far longer than the physical house or its inhabitants. The night was quiet, but the power of the heirloom, invisible yet undeniable, resonated through the estate, an enduring testament to its inescapable dominion. Dawn broke over the estate, but it brought no relief, no sense of liberation. The house, now bathed in a pale gray light, seemed indifferent to the passage of night, as if it had absorbed the secrets, fears, and anxieties of generations, and retained them in its walls. I walked through the grand entrance once more, tracing the familiar contours of the hallway, the furniture, the portraits of forebears, whose eyes seemed alive with judgment, and the faint echoes of whispers that had never truly ceased. It was impossible to separate the physical space from the psychological imprint left by the heirloom. Every corner, every shadow, every creaking floorboard was a testament to the way this singular object had woven itself into the very fabric of the family's existence. In the drawing room, the remaining members of the family gathered one last time. Their faces bore the fatigue of inherited tension, the quiet resignation of those who had lived under the subtle tyranny of an object that had defined so much of their life. Conversation was careful, laden with unspoken history, even in the absence of the object itself, now secured in its protective case. The gravity of its influence persisted. It had conditioned not just behavior, but thought. Habits, fears, alliances, and prejudices had been sculpted by its silent presence. Some gestures, some words, even some silences, seemed dictated by the lingering power it exercised, as though its authority transcended space and time. I examined the heirloom itself for the first time in daylight. Its form was deceptively simple, an unassuming object that could easily have been dismissed by anyone unaware of its legacy. But within its design, in its composition, lay the subtle cues and symbols that had given it a peculiar potency. It was not magic in the overt sense, nor was it inherently sinister. Its power was in the accumulation of observation, in the rituals and respect cultivated around it, in the generations of fear, reverence, and expectation it had inspired. Every scratch, every polish, every carefully maintained detail reinforced its authority, making obedience habitual, almost reflexive, and dissent inconceivable. The family had come to understand, finally, that their struggles were not only with one another, but with a cumulative legacy of expectation and conditioning. Parents had unwittingly imposed the heirloom's dictates,
upon children. Children, in turn, had interpreted these dictates as inviolable law, and as they matured, they enforced them in new and often stricter ways. The object had become a repository of collective memory, a silent arbiter that preserved and amplified the behaviors, anxieties, and ambitions of all who had ever lived in the house. To resist it was to resist a continuum that had long surpassed any single individual's control. Outside, the estate grounds were quiet, almost sterile in their morning light. The gardens, meticulously maintained, hinted at the same obsessive attention the family had applied to their own conduct. Every hedge, every path, every arrangement of flora reflected the internal discipline the heirloom had instilled. Even nature seemed to have been shaped by the invisible pressure of order and expectation. I wandered through the gardens, noting how the geometry of the paths and the placement of statues created subtle lines of sight that guided movement, much like the heirloom had guided thought. It was a remarkable realization. The object's influence had expanded beyond direct observation to shape the entire lived environment, blending external and internal discipline into a single continuous experience. Returning to the study, I noted the stacks of ledgers, letters, and family records. The written word, preserved over generations, had become a secondary mechanism of influence, codifying the lessons imposed by the heirloom. Instructions, warnings, and historical accounts reinforced behavioral norms, ensuring that even if the object were removed, its ethos would remain embedded in the consciousness of those who inhabited the house. In essence, the heirloom had created a self-perpetuating system, a structure in which control, expectation, and legacy were inseparable. The house itself, the documents, the routines, all were extensions of the original power, embedded in that deceptively simple object. As I prepared to leave, I paused in the main hall, taking in the full scope of the estate and the lives contained within it. The heirloom, now safely enclosed, still radiated its influence in subtle, almost imperceptible way. Its story, intertwined with the rise and fall of a family, illustrated the profound impact a single object could have when combined with tradition, fear, and reverence. It was a reminder that power need not be grandiose or overt to be absolute. Sometimes, the quietest forces, shaped by history, ritual, and psychology, were the most formidable, capable of shaping destinies and leaving legacies far beyond the immediate grasp of comprehension. Walking away, I realized that the estate would continue to resonate with the heirloom's presence for generations. Even absent its physical form, the lessons, fears, and patterns it had established would endure. Rooms would echo with the silent rules it had enforced. Relationships would reflect the tensions and hierarchies it had dictated. Children born long after the object was removed would still navigate invisible influence, guided by the accumulated behaviors and expectations it had instilled. The family's identity, inextricable from the heirloom, had been irrevocably shaped. Its legacy was eternal, not in possession or display, but in the subtle orchestration of thought, behavior, and memory. The finality of this understanding was humbling. The heirloom was not simply a catalyst for chaos or misery. It was a lens through which human behavior, desire, and fear were filtered and magnified. Its subtle orchestration of family life demonstrated the extraordinary capacity of objects to encode and perpetuate social and psychological control. Leaving the estate, I carried with me the full weight of what I had observed, a reminder that some legacies are more powerful in their invisibility than in their visibility, and that sometimes the smallest objects can exert dominion over the largest lives. The house, the family, and the heirloom had together created a continuum of influence that could not be broken, only observed, understood, and respected. As the estate receded behind me, shrouded now in the morning mist, I understood that this story of obedience, fear, reverence, and inheritance was a cautionary tale for all who encountered it. The heirloom's physical form might have been contained, but its lessons, and its authority would persist, woven into the very fabric of the family's existence. Its subtle power, invisible to most, but undeniable to those who lived within its orb, would endure, as a testament to the extraordinary ways in which objects, tradition, and human psychology can intertwine to create legacies that outlast time, memory, and even the individuals who first succumbed to them. The story was complete, yet its resonance would continue indefinitely, a whisper in the walls, a shadow in the halls, a silent teacher of the lessons carved into generations.
If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more mysteries that will keep you on the edge of your seat. I decided to examine the bedrooms, spaces that had witnessed both the mundane and the extraordinary. Here, the heirloom's influence was deeply personal. Each generation had carved out routines, rituals, and secrets around it, embedding its presence into their daily lives. In one room, I found remnants of correspondence between siblings, discussing strategies to maintain control over the heirloom's perception. Even intimate matters, from courtships to familial disagreements, had been framed through the lens of the object's significance. The heirloom had become a silent adjudicator, a force against which human desires and ambitions were measured, constrained, and manipulated. Moving through the manor's corridors, I noticed how the design itself had been subtly altered over time. Hallways had been extended or blocked, alcoves added, and lighting adjusted to ensure the heirloom remained visible from multiple vantage points. It was clear that the architecture was not merely functional, but symbolic, orchestrated to reinforce the object's centrality. The flow of movement, the angles of sight lines, and even the placement of mirrors all served to maintain awareness of the heirloom. The house had evolved as a reflection of obsession, its structure both a container and a conduit for the power the object held over its inhabitants. I paused in a small study tucked beneath a staircase, where faint traces of soot hinted at a once burning fire, long since extinguished. Here the intellectual consequences of the heirloom were most evident. Family members had devoted hours to study, reflection, and calculation, all centered around the object's management. Philosophical debates, moral contemplations, and tactical planning had unfolded within these walls, guided by the implicit understanding that every decision bore the weight of the heirloom's legacy. Knowledge had become a tool for preservation, manipulation, and control, tied irrevocably to the object's symbolic power. In the attic, the air was heavier, laden with dust and the scent of aged wood. Trunks and boxes, some locked and others abandoned, contained artifacts that chronicled the family's entanglement with the heirloom. Documents revealed intricate financial arrangements, legal disputes, and personal notes that mapped a web of dependency spanning generations. The heirloom's influence extended beyond mere presence. It had become the axis around which fortunes, relationships, and reputations turned. To understand it was to confront the full spectrum of human ambition, vulnerability, and fallibility. One chest contained diaries that provided an unfiltered view into the emotional toll exacted by the object, confessions of fear, envy, and sorrow intertwined with accounts of triumph and strategic advantage. Sibling rivalries, parental expectations, and marital negotiations had all been colored by the heirloom's authority. The entries revealed an ongoing struggle between devotion and resentment, pride and regret, highlighting how the object could simultaneously inspire awe and perpetuate suffering. The psychological landscape of the family was complex and layered, defined as much by the heirloom as by the people themselves. Descending to the library, I found a series of marginal notes in various tomes, indicating a pattern of consultation and reflection tied to the heirloom's influence. Recipes, almanacs, and guides had been annotated with strategies for preservation, social maneuvering, and conflict resolution. Even seemingly trivial texts had been imbued with meaning, demonstrating that the object's reach extended into every sphere of intellectual activity. It was as though the heirloom had dictated not only the family's actions, but the very way they processed knowledge and reasoned about the world. Later, I moved to the garden, where the heirloom's shadow had influenced external spaces as well. Pathways were carefully laid to ensure that visitors could be guided past vantage points designed to highlight the object from within the manor. Fountains, statues, and hedges were positioned to create lines of sight, emphasizing the visual and symbolic prominence of the heirloom. Here too, the family's preoccupation with status, perception, and influence manifested in tangible ways, extending their internal obsessions into the surrounding environment. By nightfall, I reflected on the manifold consequences I had observed. The heirloom's power was multidimensional, encompassing emotional, social, intellectual, and spatial domains. Its influence was pervasive, structuring behavior, shaping decisions, and determining outcomes at every level of existence. The family's legacy was inseparable from the object's presence, a legacy defined by both ingenuity and error, ambition and obsession, insight and folly. Every action, from the smallest domestic choice to the grandest strategic decision, had been filtered through the lens of the heirloom's authority. As I prepared to leave for the evening, I considered the moral and ethical implications of my finding. The heirloom had been a catalyst for both creation and destruction, a source of identity and division, a medium through which power was exercised and challenged. Its influence had fostered achievement, reinforced status, and maintained cohesion, yet simultaneously generated conflict, resentment, and decay. The object's impact was absolute in its subtlety, omnipresent in its invisibility, and undeniable in its consequences. I paused one final time in the central hall, noting how the interplay of light and shadow accentuated the heirloom's symbolic dominance. It stood not merely as an artifact, but as a testament to the capacity of objects to shape human destiny. The family's lives, fortunes, and relationships had been orchestrated in concert with the heirloom, each generation responding to its imperatives, consciously or unconsciously. The narrative of the manor was, in essence, the narrative of the object itself, a story of fascination, manipulation, and the inexorable consequences of allowing a single element to dictate the course of human existence. By the end of the night, I understood that my exploration had revealed the heirloom, not simply as a physical object, but as a principle, a force that governed behavior, thought, and circumstance. It had become both a lens and a mirror, reflecting the ambitions, fears, and desires of those who had come before. And as I left the manor under the cover of darkness, I could not help but feel that the true measure of the heirloom's power lay not in its material composition, but in its enduring ability to shape human destiny across generations. The house, once vibrant with life and activity, now seemed almost suspended in time, each room a repository not just of furniture and heirlooms, but of lingering tensions and the weight of expectation. I wandered through the corridors, feeling the history embedded in the walls, hearing the faint echoes of footsteps long gone. Every floorboard creaked underfoot as if reluctant to reveal the secrets it had held for centuries. The heirloom, now firmly entrenched at the center of the family's consciousness, continued to cast its influence, shaping the rhythm of daily life in subtle, almost imperceptible ways. I found myself in the dining hall, where generations had gathered to share meals, celebrate milestones, and occasionally confront one another. The long table, scarred with years of use, bore witness to discussions of inheritance, property, and social standing, all revolving around the object that had come to dominate the family's concern. Even casual conversations were tinged with the awareness of its presence. Remarks were measured, smiles cautious, and disagreements tempered by the unspoken understanding that the heirloom dictated more than protocol. It dictated outcome. Here the boundary between familial duty and personal ambition blurred into a constant negotiation with the past and the object itself. In the study adjoining the dining hall, I uncovered records of disputes and reconciliations that had defined the family's dynamic. Letters between siblings revealed strategies designed to protect or exploit the heirloom,
Negotiations with outsiders exposed the object's leverage in social and financial dealings, and personal reflections recorded the inner conflicts that arose from its omnipresence. The heirloom's influence was profound. It had become a prism through which every action, relationship, and decision was refracted. The family's successes, failures, and enduring rivalries were all inseparable from the object that had long since ceased to be merely material. Ascending to the second floor, I explored the private chambers where intimacy and secrecy had intertwined with the object's impact. Here, the emotional consequences of the heirloom were most visible. Diaries and journals revealed the psychological strain of constant comparison, the anxiety of judgment, and the subtle manipulation inherent in living under its influence. Love, resentment, ambition, and fear were all filtered through the lens of the object, creating patterns of behavior that were at once predictable and uniquely destructive. It was as though the family had internalized the heirloom, carrying its authority within their thoughts, decisions, and relationships. I paused at the window of one bedroom, looking out over the garden, where carefully laid paths and statues reflected the same meticulous attention paid to the interior. The external landscape mirrored the interior hierarchy, each hedge, fountain, and sculpture positioned to reinforce visibility, status, and control. The garden was not merely ornamental, it was an extension of the heirloom's dominion, a physical manifestation of the psychological and social structures that the object had helped to establish. Every detail, no matter how minute, contributed to a narrative in which the heirloom remained central, guiding both movement and perception. Venturing into the attic, I found boxes of personal effects, many unopened for clothing, trinkets, and miscellaneous items, all seemingly ordinary, carried traces of decisions shaped by the object's influence. Some pieces had been preserved carefully to maintain appearances, others hidden away in shame or secrecy, yet all bore the imprint of a family negotiating with power, tradition, and expectation. Even inanimate items had become actors in a silent drama, playing roles assigned by the heirloom's subtle yet pervasive authority. I descended to the cellar, where dim light and the scent of earth and stone created an almost sacred atmosphere. Here, the object's influence extended into practical matters, storage of provisions, the organization of spaces, and even security measures were all dictated with the heirloom in mind. Families had gone to great lengths to protect it, ensuring that it remained untarnished and central to their life. The cellar, though utilitarian in function, served as a testament to the lengths the family would go to maintain continuity, control, and reverence for an object that had transcended mere materiality. Late into the evening, I returned to the main hall to reflect on what I had observed. The heirloom's role had become so ingrained that it influenced not only actions, but perceptions, shaping how members of the family interpreted events, measured success, and evaluated one another. It had become a silent arbiter, arbitrating conflicts and bestowing legitimacy, and its absence, even hypothetical, would have rendered the family rudderless. The object's influence was not coercive in the conventional sense, rather it operated subtly, embedded in routines, rituals, and expectations, guiding behavior with an invisible yet undeniable hand. In the Grand Library, I discovered evidence of intellectual engagement dictated by the heirloom. Books had been annotated with references, strategies, and reflections that tied scholarship to practical control of the object. The pursuit of knowledge was inseparable from the pursuit of power and stability within the family. Learning became a tool for reinforcing influence and safeguarding legacy. Even abstract ideas, from philosophy to finance, had been filtered through the lens of maintaining the heirloom's primacy. This pattern of thought, cultivated over generations, revealed the enduring capacity of objects to shape human cognition, values, and priorities. As midnight approached, I traced the heirloom's shadow across the various rooms, noting how its presence structured not only space but time. The family's lives had been organized around routines that acknowledged and reinforced the object's significance. Mealtimes, social visits, and private contemplations all followed rhythms established with the heirloom in mind. Even in sleep, one could sense the subtle influence, the internalization of an external authority that dictated the pace and focus of life. The object had become both compass and anchor, a reference point against which all activity was measured. Finally, I stood in the central hall once more, contemplating the complex web of influence I had witnessed. The heirloom had acted as both catalyst and constraint, inspiring ambition while enforcing discipline, generating creativity while fostering dependency, nurturing cohesion while sowing rival. Its power was neither overt nor easily measurable. It was embedded in relationships, space, and cognition, operating across layers of experience and perception. The family's legacy was a tapestry woven from devotion, obsession, strategy, and compromise, all threads connected through the enduring presence of a single object. By the time I left, the manor was cloaked in darkness, and the heirloom lay in quiet dominance, as it had for generations. My observations had revealed the extent to which an object could shape destiny, not through force, but through the subtle, persistent structuring of life. The family's achievements and failures, joys and regrets, were all interlaced with the presence of the heirloom, and its authority remained absolute, though largely invisible. As I closed the door behind me, I carried with me a profound understanding. The true power of the heirloom lay not in its form or composition, but in its ability to orchestrate the lives, minds, and hearts of those who had come before, and those who would come after. The dawn light filtered through the heavy curtains, painting the rooms in a muted glow that made the shadows seem longer, more deliberate. In the quiet of the early morning, the house seemed to breathe with a rhythm dictated by centuries of habit, its pulse almost in sync with the people who had lived and suffered within its wall. I wandered from room to room, noting how even the smallest objects, carefully positioned, reflected the hierarchy and influence the heirloom had imposed upon the family. Chairs, tables, and cabinets all seemed arranged to serve as silent witnesses, marking the territories of power and deference that had been established over generations. The study, always a focal point of strategy and decision, revealed yet more evidence of the heirloom's omnipresence. Papers once scattered were now meticulously organized, each document labeled and referenced with obsessive precision. Legal records, letters, and ledgers detailed a family perpetually negotiating with its past, present, and future, all through the prism of this singular object. Every decision, from mundane household expenses to matters of estate management, bore the subtle fingerprints of its influence. The heirloom's presence had turned ordinary administration into a game of calculated moves, each step carefully measured against the potential consequences of its shifting favor. I moved next to the sitting room, where portraits of ancestors hung in stern procession. Faces frozen in oil and canvas stared back with eyes that seemed to see more than the passing observer. Their expressions, solemn and unyielding, conveyed both reverence and warning. The heirloom had long dictated which legacies were celebrated, which achievements remembered, and which failures quietly erased. Even the framing of these portraits, the placement, the lighting, the order of display, was controlled to reinforce the implicit hierarchy and remind living descendants of the object's enduring authority. The room itself became a physical manifestation of psychological conditioning, teaching obedience and respect through spatial and visual cues. Upstairs, in the family's private chambers, the emotional weight of the heirloom became more pronounced. Here, the journals and letters revealed a web of fear, envy, and longing, where personal desires were constantly negotiated against familial expectations. Children, siblings, and spouses had all internalized the object's authority, shaping their aspirations and relationships accordingly. The heirloom acted as a subtle arbiter, instilling both caution and ambition, guiding behavior in ways that were nearly invisible yet unmistakable in their effects. Affection and rivalry, loyalty and betrayal, were filtered through its influence, leaving no emotion untouched. The kitchen, usually a place of warmth and sustenance, told a story of its own. Cooking and cleaning were conducted with a meticulousness that went beyond necessity. Recipes were passed down, measured and executed with the same precision that the heirloom demanded in other aspects of life. Staff and family alike knew that mistakes, however small, might be interpreted as lapses in respect for tradition, and the object itself, even nourishment, had become a reflection of power, control, and the subtle expectations imposed by centuries of obedience. The heirloom's reach extended even into the daily rhythms of survival, structuring life in ways both practical and symbolic. I lingered in the grand hall, where the family gathered for formal occasions. Here, the heirloom's influence was most publicly displayed. Seating arrangements, conversation topics, and even gestures were carefully choreographed, reinforcing the hierarchy and reminding all present of the object's centrality. The hall had witnessed celebrations, arguments, and reconciliations, each shaped by an unspoken acknowledgement of the heirloom's authority. Social rituals, once casual or spontaneous, had become exercises in strategy and demonstration, where influence was carefully measured and respect meticulously calculated.
By late afternoon, I had returned to the drawing room, a space that had once hosted grand receptions and celebrations. Dust-covered furniture and tarnished candelabras gave the impression of a long-abandoned elegance, yet the energy of past events remained palpable. Here, the family had entertained guests, negotiated marriages, and solidified social status, all while the heirloom's presence dictated the underlying power dynamics. Diaries described how conversations were carefully orchestrated, compliments were given with caution, and laughter often concealed underlying threats. The object had become a silent participant in every gathering, an invisible arbiter of influence and authority. I paused before a large mirror, noticing the reflection not only of the room, but also of the patterns it had witnessed. The mirror, once a decorative flourish, had been a silent observer of gestures, glances, and confrontations. Here too, the heirloom exerted its influence indirectly, shaping behavior through the threat of observation and the anticipation of judgment. The family's obsession had altered not only what they did, but also how they thought, as every action was measured against the potential consequences of possession or loss of the pendant. As evening approached, I reviewed the collection of letters, diaries, and notes I had gathered throughout the day. A recurring theme emerged. The object's influence extended beyond the immediate holders. Cousins plotted against one another, servants withheld information, and distant relatives adjusted their ambitions based on the perceived movements of the heirloom. This single object had generated a chain reaction of distrust, manipulation, and emotional tension that spanned generations. The family's legacy was not merely disrupted, it was fundamentally reshaped by the pendant's presence. Before leaving, I stood in the hallway, listening to the creaks of the old house settling in the cool evening air. I realized that the heirloom had acted as both catalyst and magnifier, turning small grievances into major disputes and subtle ambitions into life-altering decisions. It had shaped the family's trajectory in ways that were invisible to outsiders, yet undeniable to those who lived within the house. The manor itself seemed to breathe with the residue of these interactions, each room a testament to the object's power, each shadow a reminder of the consequences of obsession. I left the house that night with a deeper understanding of the heirloom's impact. It was no longer simply a matter of inheritance or material value. The object had become a psychological force, an agent of change that shaped personalities, behaviors, and ultimately destiny. It had been both the anchor and the storm, holding the family together while simultaneously tearing it apart, a duality that no one could escape. The following day, I returned to the manor with a renewed sense of urgency. Part of me feared what I might uncover, yet curiosity pressed me forward. If the heirloom had influenced the family so profoundly, understanding its exact mechanisms could illuminate not just their history, but the subtle ways in which obsession can corrupt an entire lineage. My focus now shifted from physical spaces to the human consequences, tracing the emotional and psychological toll the heirloom had inflicted across generations. I began in the nursery wing, a series of rooms that once housed the youngest members of the family. Faded wallpaper, peeling in corners, revealed glimpses of hand-drawn sketches, children's attempts to imprint their imagination on the walls, unaware of the tensions unfolding around them. Yet even here, the influence of the heirloom was unmistakable. Diaries left by older siblings described quarrels over who would inherit it first, whispers of favoritism, and subtle forms of coercion designed to manipulate emotions from an early age. The heirloom, it seemed, did not simply affect adults. It insinuated itself into the psyche of children, shaping loyalties, anxieties, and ambitions. One particularly revealing entry detailed a child's fear of punishment if they touched the heirloom without permission. The object, though inanimate, became a locus of authority and control. Parents and guardians enforced rules obsessively, using the heirloom as a lever to influence behavior, instill obedience, and maintain dominance. Small acts of defiance were met with stern lectures, confiscations, or cold silences, creating a climate of fear and compliance. Over time, these early experiences appeared to have forged patterns of insecurity, competitiveness, and distrust that persisted into adulthood. Moving from the nursery, I explored the bedrooms of the teenagers, rooms that reflected both rebellion and conformity. Posters, personal effects, and private writings revealed a duality. Adolescents yearning for independence yet tethered by the weight of the heirloom. Rivalries over its possession intensified during formative years, exacerbating sibling conflicts and leaving lasting emotional scars. I read accounts of furtive negotiations, secret alliances, and calculated strategies, all enacted to gain a perceived advantage over peers. The heirloom had become a tool of psychological training, honing skills in manipulation, strategic thinking, and emotional resilience, albeit through fear and rivalry, rather than nurturing guidance. In the master bedroom, the tension reached another level. This space, traditionally associated with authority and privacy, contained letters documenting marital strife, disputes over financial control, and subtle power plays between spouses. The heirloom's influence permeated these relationships, dictating trust, jealousy, and negotiation. Couples monitored each other's interactions with the object, measuring loyalty, evaluating intentions, and anticipating moves that could determine inheritance or social standing. The heirloom, though small and silent, exerted a disproportionate effect, acting as both arbiter and provocateur in intimate spheres of life. The library offered a deeper insight into the intellectual ramifications of obsession. Volumes on history, philosophy, and estate management lined the walls, yet interspersed among them were journals detailing strategies for retaining control of the heirloom. Plans for financial leverage, political alliances, and even personal reputation were intertwined with the object's perceived importance. Here I noticed a pattern. The heirloom had become an obsession that intertwined with every aspect of life, dictating decisions that might otherwise have been independent or rational. Its power was not simply in the material, but in the symbolic authority it conferred, a tangible measure of social leverage, influence, and dominance within the family hierarchy. Descending to the basement, I encountered another manifestation of its influence: storage rooms that were meticulously catalogued, spaces once intended for mundane household purposes, transformed into arenas of control. The family's obsession extended to how the heirloom was housed, who had access, and under what conditions. Locks, safes, and hidden compartments proliferated, each layer representing not just physical security, but psychological assertion. The heirloom's presence created a lattice of surveillance and regulation, where each member of the household was conscious of both real and perceived observation. Conversations with former servants, whose notes and recordings I had discovered tucked behind panels, revealed the subtler emotional manipulations enacted daily. These individuals had observed the slow erosion of familial trust, whispered accusations, subtle threats, and indirect punishments designed to maintain a hierarchy controlled by the heirloom. Even the household staff became participants in the psychological landscape, forced to navigate the expectations, fears, and schemes that had developed around the object. Their testimonies depicted a world where every action,
Every word and every glance could be interpreted through the lens of possession or loss of the heirloom. By mid-afternoon, I returned to the main hall, the central artery of the manor. I observed how the family had structured social gatherings to maximize the heirloom's influence. Seating arrangements, conversation topics, and even gestures were orchestrated to reinforce hierarchies, assert authority, and subtly intimidate potential challenge. The object's presence was a silent but powerful participant, shaping interactions and dictating behavior without a single spoken command. Its role in social engineering within the family was profound, as it created dynamics that reinforced dominance, compliance, and internalized fear across multiple generations. As evening fell, I reflected on the manifold effects of the heirloom. It had transformed the manor into a psychological landscape where control, surveillance, and manipulation were paramount. Each room, each object, and each interpersonal exchange bore the imprint of its influence. The family's story, I realized, was not merely one of greed or vanity. It was a cautionary tale about the insidious nature of obsession and how a single object could warp relationships, values, and life trajectory. Before leaving, I paused at the grand staircase, considering the full spectrum of consequences. The heirloom's impact extended far beyond material loss or inheritance disputes. It shaped identity, molded behavior, and dictated emotional responses. It had acted as both a binding agent and a corrosive force, simultaneous, uniting and dividing, guiding and constraining. Its legacy was a tapestry of ambition, fear, manipulation, and unintended consequences, woven deeply into the very fabric of the family. That night, as I departed under a moonlit sky, I understood that my journey into the manor had uncovered not just the history of a family or an object, but the profound ways in which material obsession can echo across time, influencing choices, emotions, and destiny. The heirloom had become a prism through which the entire human experience of the family could be observed, its power subtle yet undeniable, shaping lives in ways both visible and hidden. The following morning, I returned to the manor, determined to delve deeper into the economic and societal consequences of the heirloom's presence. While the previous explorations had focused on psychological and interpersonal ramifications, it was now evident that the object had also dictated financial behaviors, social positioning, and even political maneuvering. It had become a fulcrum, not only of the family's private lives, but of their external interactions, shaping their fortunes and misfortunes alike. I began in the estate's accounting room, a dimly lit space, where ledgers and financial records were meticulously maintained. Dust covered the edges of paper stacks, evidence of long periods of neglect, punctuated by moments of obsessive attention. The heirloom had influenced spending, investment, and savings patterns across generations. Records showed extravagant purchases, lavish renovations, and unnecessary acquisitions, all justified by the imperative to secure the heirloom's prominence or to maintain appearances in relation to it. Wealth was squandered, not in the pursuit of comfort, but in the relentless pursuit of status linked to the object. One ledger, dated several decades prior, revealed entries that highlighted this pattern. Rare art, exotic furnishings, and costly renovations were purchased or commissioned solely to display proximity to the heirloom. The family's advisors, both financial and legal, had been enlisted to protect, preserve, and promote the heirloom's influence, often at the expense of pragmatic estate management. In essence, the heirloom's power extended into economic decision-making, creating cycles of resource allocation that were disproportionate and ultimately destructive. Moving to the reception halls, I observed how the family had leveraged the heirloom for social influence. Guests, from prominent city officials to visiting aristocrats, were subtly evaluated based on their reactions to the object. Favor was granted, alliances were formed, and rivalries were exacerbated through interactions mediated by the heirloom. Invitations to dinner, access to certain rooms, and even the approval of marriage prospects were often contingent upon proximity to the object or demonstration of loyalty to it. Social power had been weaponized, and the heirloom had become the measuring stick by which human relationships were assessed and manipulated. I found particularly illuminating accounts in private correspondence between family members. Letters revealed the tensions and negotiations surrounding the heirloom's role in arranging marriages, securing business contracts, and influencing political appointment. Each generation had treated the object not simply as a family treasure, but as a strategic asset, a means to acquire, retain, and consolidate power. The object's symbolic weight dictated behavior far beyond the walls of the manor, extending into wider networks of influence and control. In the servants' quarters, I discovered first-hand accounts of the family's strategies in using the heirloom to exert authority over household staff. Written observations, passed down through the years, described how minor transgressions were monitored and punished, often with an implicit reference to the object. The heirloom acted as a psychological lever, maintaining a hierarchy where obedience and vigilance were constant requirements. This extended to recruitment, training, and retention of personnel. Servants were evaluated not only for competency, but for their ability to navigate the social and psychological ecosystem created by the heirloom's influence. The impact was particularly pronounced in moments of crisis. During periods of financial strain or political instability, the heirloom became both a scapegoat and a tool for deflection. Family members attributed failures to mismanagement of the object, or perceived disrespect toward it, redirecting blame and preserving internal cohesion at the expense of transparency. In essence, the heirloom operated as a stabilizing myth, its authority unquestioned even when material consequences suggested otherwise. As the afternoon progressed, I examined the estate's archives of legal dispute, wills, codicils, and contested inheritance documents, underscored the centrality of the heirloom in shaping family dynamics. Prolonged legal battles had erupted over its possession, with each faction invoking ancestral precedent, moral obligation, or strategic necessity to justify claims. Lawyers and judges became unwilling participants in a centuries-long drama, dictated by an object whose material value was dwarfed by its symbolic significance. The family's reputation, cohesion, and wealth were inextricably linked to the heirloom, resulting in cycles of conflict that left lasting scars on both property and lineage. In a secluded reading nook, I found accounts of outsiders' perception. Friends, rivals, and neighbors had observed the family's obsession with the heirloom, often noting shifts in behavior, mood, and social engagement when it was present or absent. Testimonies described envy, suspicion, and even fear of association with the family during periods of heightened scrutiny over the object. Its influence radiated beyond the private sphere, shaping public perception and social interactions across the community. Returning to the central hall, I reflected on the interconnected consequences I had observed. The heirloom's impact was comprehensive. It had infiltrated the emotional, psychological, social, and financial dimensions of the family's existence. The obsession it generated had consequences both visible and subtle, influencing every choice, conversation, and plan. Wealth had been amassed and squandered, relationships nurtured and strained, reputations constructed and destroyed, all under the shadow of a single object. The heirloom, though inert, had dictated the architecture of life within and around the manor. Finally, I paused in the drawing room, a space where generations had convened for strategic discussion. I considered how knowledge, strategy, and power had been concentrated in the hands of those who controlled the heirloom. Here, intellectual and practical considerations merged with emotional investment, creating a potent mix that both sustained and imperiled the family. Decisions were rarely rational. They were guided by the need to maintain the heirloom's prominence, protect its aura, and manage its perception both internally and externally. By dusk, I had begun to see a pattern. The heirloom was not merely an object of desire, but a force that structured life itself. Its presence had dictated the evolution of the family's social norms, ethical considerations, and economic priority. The object's symbolic weight had eclipsed its physical form, becoming a determinant of fortune, influence, and destiny. In every room, in every ledger, in every diary and letter, its invisible hand could be traced, shaping behavior, and outcomes in ways both profound and tragic. As I left the manor for the evening, I understood that my journey into the lives shaped by the heirloom had revealed more than the story of a single object. It had illuminated the broader mechanisms by which obsession, symbolic, emotional, and psychological, can infiltrate every aspect of human existence. The family's legacy was not merely one of material inheritance, but of influence, power, and the inexorable consequences of allowing an object to dictate the course of generation. The evening light had faded into a muted gray, and the manor seemed to shift in response to the absence of sunlight. The heirloom still at the center of its gravity, I lingered in the main hall, observing the subtle interactions between its architecture and the memories that clung to its wall. The object, though physically unchanged, seemed to shape the very atmosphere of the place, an invisible current influencing the rhythm of life within its confines. It was as if the heirloom had breathed into the walls themselves, lending them an unspoken authority, a weight that pressed on every corner of the house and every soul that entered.
The wind cut sharply across the old stone manor, carrying with it the faint scent of rain and decaying leaves. It had been years since anyone had truly lived here, yet the house seemed to breathe, as if remembering the lives it had once contained. I stepped over the threshold cautiously, the wooden floorboards groaning beneath my weight. Each step echoed through the grand hall, bouncing off faded tapestries and cracked portraits of ancestors who had long since passed. Their eyes seemed to follow me, not with malice, but with quiet accusation, as if judging the recklessness of those who had allowed the family to crumble. The story of the manor was inseparable from the story of the family who had built it. Generations of careful planning, fortune, and ambition had accumulated within these walls. But one object, an object that had been overlooked, misplaced, or perhaps purposefully hidden, had undone it all. The heirloom, a delicate and unassuming piece of jewelry, had once symbolized the family's unity and power, passed down from mother to daughter for centuries. It carried the weight of tradition and the whispers of promises made and broken, and yet, in its very essence, it held the seeds of ruin. I began in the drawing room, a space once filled with laughter, music, and heated discussion. Now the furniture was draped in dust-covered sheets, chandeliers hung like skeletal remnants of forgotten grandeur, and the fireplace stood cold, its ashes long since scattered. Every corner seemed to hide a memory, a secret, or a warning. As I explored, I found letters carefully stacked in a mahogany cabinet, their ink faded but legible. The handwriting told stories of ambition, envy, and desire, revealing a family constantly on edge, struggling to balance the appearance of strength with the fragile reality of human frailty. The heirloom first appeared in these letters, described in detail by a matriarch whose hand had long since turned to dust. It was a small, intricately designed pendant, adorned with gemstones that reflected light in subtle, almost mesmerizing ways. It was said to bring fortune to those who possessed it, and yet, as the documents suggested, it also attracted greed, suspicion, and betrayal. One sibling wrote of the fear that another might seize it, while another recounted the quiet resentment that grew when the heirloom became the center of disputes over inheritance. Each generation had been touched by its presence, and each had been scarred in ways both visible and hidden. Venturing deeper into the manor, I discovered a hidden staircase concealed behind a faded tapestry in the library. Dust motes danced in the narrow beam of my flashlight. As I descended, the air grew cooler, more oppressive, carrying with it the faint scent of mildew and something older, something less definable. At the bottom lay a small windowless chamber. The walls were lined with shelves, each filled with trinkets, keepsakes, and forgotten records. And there in the center, on a velvet cushion, rested the heirloom itself. Its gemstones glimmered faintly in the dim light, as if aware of their power and the chaos they had sown over the centuries. I could not help but feel the weight of history pressing down upon me. This single object had been both a blessing and a curse. Families had formed alliances around it, arranged marriages for the promise of its possession, and yet they had also torn themselves apart, blinded by desire and suspicion. The pendant had become a mirror, reflecting the very worst of human nature, the envy, ambition, and selfishness that can fester quietly until it bursts forth in ruinous force. As I examined the surrounding objects, I found more than just the heirloom's tale. There were journals chronicling small betrayals, failed attempts to conceal its whereabouts, and even cryptic warnings that the pendant was not simply an object, but one particularly weathered journal suggested that the heirloom had an almost magnetic pull on the family's emotions, magnifying tension and resentment in ways that seemed supernatural. Though carefully worded to avoid direct accusation, the family had feared its influence, yet none could resist its allure. The chamber also contained remnants of plans, diagrams, and correspondences between family members who had long since perished. These documents revealed the desperate measures taken to protect or exploit the heirloom. Hidden compartments in walls, coded messages exchanged in handwriting only visible to insiders, and even the occasional threat veiled as advice. The sheer ingenuity, coupled with the obsessive fear surrounding a single object, painted a portrait of a lineage consumed by its own history. By the time I returned upstairs, the sun had shifted, casting long shadows across the manor's empty hall. The heirloom, though small and deceptively simple, had defined generations. Its absence or presence dictated alliances, inspired arguments, and ultimately led to the disintegration of a family that had once appeared unassailable. It was impossible to overstate the gravity of a single object, wielding such influence over the lives, fortunes, and fates of those tied to it by blood. Walking through the neglected dining room, I could almost hear the echoes of past dinners, the polite conversation layered with tension, the subtle barbs exchanged beneath courteous smiles, the unspoken understanding that the heirloom's future would determine their path. Every object in the room, every artifact of domestic life, seemed to carry a fragment of this story. The fear, the pride, and the quiet despair that had grown over generations. In the main hall, I paused before a grand portrait of the family's founder. His expression was stern, eyes narrowed, as if warning future generations. It was a reminder that history has a way of repeating itself, particularly when the forces of greed, pride, and desire converge around a singular point. The heirloom was not just jewelry. It was a symbol of the family's vulnerabilities, their ambitions, and ultimately their undoing. By evening, the house seemed almost alive, the walls holding their breath, the shadows shifting in anticipation. The pendant rested safely in its chamber, yet its story was far from over. Its influence, woven into the fabric of the family's history, was a cautionary tale about the dangers of obsession and the fragile nature of legacy. For in the hands of those unprepared for its weight, even a small object could unravel a lineage, leaving only whispers, dust, and regrets behind. And so as I left the manor, closing the heavy front doors behind me, I carried not just the memory of the heirloom, but a profound understanding of the destructive potential hidden in the objects we cherish. Sometimes the most innocuous possessions bear the heaviest burdens, and sometimes the legacies they shape are doomed from the moment they are entrusted. The forgotten heirloom had ruined a family, yes, but in telling its story I realized that ruin often begins in silence, grows in neglect, and only reveals itself when it is too late to undo. The morning after my first exploration, I returned to the manor, drawn not by curiosity alone, but by the sense that the house itself had stories to tell. Stories I could almost hear in the creaks of the floorboards, and the sigh of the shutters rattling in the wind. I moved carefully, mindful of the weight of history pressing in from all directions. Every room, every hallway seemed to carry a whisper of the family's past, tiny fragments of conversations, bursts of laughter, or the quiet sobs of disappointment, echoing faintly through the year. I decided to start with the bedrooms,
private spaces where the family's intimate struggles had played out. Each chamber was a capsule of memory, canopies sagging under the weight of age, lace curtains yellowed with time, personal belongings left in an abrupt abandonment, as if those who had lived there expected to return at any moment. Yet the air was heavy, charged with the consequences of generations bound to a single object, the heirloom whose presence had dictated fortunes and fates alike. In one room I found a writing desk cluttered with papers, journals, and old ink bottles long dried to brittle fragments. The notes and letters sickered across the surface revealed the subtle fractures within the family's secret alliances, whispered betrayals and calculated manipulations, all centered around the pen. There were confessions penned in trembling hands, revealing the fear and desperation that had driven members to act against one another. One diary described an argument over the heirloom that escalated into a permanent rift between siblings, a feud so bitter it never healed, and eventually led to one of them leaving the family home forever, never to return. I moved to the adjoining chamber where a child's toys lay frozen in time. A small wooden horse, chipped and worn, sat beside a faded doll whose button eyes had long since fallen out. These objects, innocuous and yet poignant, reminded me that the heirloom's influence was not limited to adults. Children too had been drawn into the web of obsession that surrounded. They had witnessed the quiet resentments, the tense silences, and the arguments that would flare unexpectedly. Over time, these early impressions would shape their understanding of loyalty, greed, and power, impressions that no amount of affection or reassurance could completely erase. Descending into the study, I uncovered a collection of portraits that had once hung proudly along the walls. Each painting, meticulously crafted, captured more than the likeness of its subject. It captured a mood, a history, an unspoken story. In one, a matriarch's eyes held a subtle warning, her hands clasped tightly over the heirloom, as if guarding it against unseen threats. In another, a son's gaze carried resentment and longing, a silent accusation aimed at those who had denied him possession of the pen. The portraits were visual diaries, reflecting the emotional toll exacted by a family's obsession with a single object. I spent hours in the library, where countless tomes chronicled the family's rise and fall. Among the histories of business ventures, property transactions, and social alliances, I found references to the heirloom, cryptic mentions of its supposed powers, the fortunes it brought, and the disputes it inspired. Some documents hinted at a near-mystical aura surrounding the pendant, describing it as an object that could amplify ambition, magnify envy, and incite actions that seemed almost predestined. The closer one came to it, the more intense these effects appeared to be. The family's collapse, I realized, was not solely the product of human weakness. It was magnified by a tangible symbol of desire, a magnet for conflict and betrayal. As I wandered through the corridors, I reflected on the patterns that emerged from the fragments of history I had uncovered. The heirloom had acted as a catalyst, bringing latent tensions to the surface, intensifying disputes, and influencing decisions that might otherwise have been manageable. Its presence encouraged secrecy and manipulation. Letters and journals revealed the careful plotting of inheritance, the scheming to secure or conceal the pendant, and the subtle psychological games that had divided even the closest relative. The family's downfall was cumulative, a slow unraveling that had spanned decades, and it had begun the moment the heirloom became more than a symbol. It had become an obsession. I paused outside the master bedroom, its heavy doors weathered and scarred. Inside, a large canopy bed dominated the space, surrounded by wardrobes, dressers, and personal effects, meticulously preserved by caretakers long since gone. I imagined the family in their final days, each member haunted by the knowledge that the pendant controlled not only their fortunes, but their relationships and futures. Arguments that began over trivial matters often escalated, with the heirloom as the unspoken point of contention. Decisions made under its influence had long-term consequences, and slowly, the family's cohesion eroded. It became clear to me that the heirloom had a psychological power beyond its aesthetic value. It acted as both magnet and mirror, drawing out desires, amplifying insecurities, and reflecting the very worst impulses of those who possessed or desired it. This was not just a story of a family torn apart by greed. It was a study of human behavior under pressure, a portrait of how a seemingly inanimate object could shape lives, dictate actions, and destroy legacy. By evening, I returned to the grand hall, the fading sunlight casting elongated shadows across the floor. The house seemed to exhale, a slow, deliberate release of the tension that had built up over centuries. The heirloom rested in its chamber, seemingly inert, yet I could sense the reverberations of its past influence lingering in the air. The house was not simply a building, it was a repository of memory, trauma, and the enduring power of obsession. I left the manor that night with a new understanding. The heirloom was far more than a decorative object. It had been a silent architect of ruin, guiding decisions, inspiring resentment, and magnifying ambition in ways that no human could have managed alone. The family's legacy, once strong and respected, had been fractured by the very object meant to symbolize unity and continuity. In every creaking floorboard, every dusty curtain, and every fading portrait, I could feel the weight of its influence, a reminder that the smallest objects can carry the heaviest burdens, and that history is often written not only by actions, but by the symbols that inspired. The following morning, I returned to the manor with a sense of purpose, determined to uncover more about the heirloom's tangible effects on the family's daily life. While the surface story was clear, arguments, feuds, and tragedies, I wanted to trace the more subtle patterns, the ways in which obsession with a single object shaped behavior and interactions over generations. I began with the dining hall, a room that had once been the heart of the household, where laughter and conversation might have masked the growing tension beneath. The long oak table dominated the space, its surface scarred by years of family meals and clandestine dealing. I noticed the faded place settings still aligned meticulously, as though the family had planned to return at any moment. Yet the air was thick with the residue of past disputes. Letters and scraps of paper hidden in the corners hinted at whispered conversations, agreements made in secret, and rivalries concealed beneath polite etiquette. One fragment described a mealtime confrontation over inheritance rights, a shouting match that ended with a younger cousin leaving in anger, never to be reconciled. The heirloom, it seemed, had a way of turning ordinary moments into flashpoints for conflict. I moved to the sideboard, where fine china and silverware were carefully arranged, and discovered journals that recorded the minutiae of family life, who sat where, what was served, and how small actions could ignite larger disputes. These records revealed a pattern of psychological warfare subtly woven into daily routines. A misplaced knife, a slightly empty teacup, or a comment made at the wrong time could escalate into a significant quarrel, all anchored to the underlying tensions surrounding the heirloom. Even mundane acts became symbolic, representing control, possession, and perceived superiority. Venturing further, I explored the hidden corridors and servant passages, areas that offered insight into the family's private and secretive deal. These narrow spaces, seldom seen by the public, were the conduits of whispers, clandestine meetings, and strategic conversations. Here I found letters tucked behind panels, notes exchanged in haste, and diagrams illustrating the placement of the heirloom within the home. The family's obsession had extended beyond personal possession. It had permeated the very architecture of the house, influencing where people moved, what they observed, and how they navigated both public and private spaces. One letter in particular stood out. It was addressed to a distant cousin, outlining a plan to secure the heirloom in the event of a dispute over inheritance. The language was meticulous, almost surgical, detailing the precise timing and method for moving the pendant without alerting others. This revealed the extent to which the family's lives were consumed by the object, not merely its value, but the power it represented, the advantage it could confer, and the security it provided in a house filled with suspicion. Even trust among close relatives had been eroded, replaced by calculated strategies to protect or acquire the heirloom. I then entered the study, a room lined with shelves of books and documents, and was struck by the contrast between the scholarly pursuits and the simmering tension that the heirloom inspired. Historical records, ledgers, and personal notes revealed how business decisions, social alliances, and marital negotiations were often influenced by the desire to gain control over the object. Contracts were carefully worded, alliances were tested, and minor slights were magnified, As I moved through the rooms, I noticed subtle marks of surveillance, a scratched floorboard here, a hidden notch there, evidence that the family monitored one another, aware that betrayal or opportunism might strike at any moment. Children, servants, and distant relatives were all implicated in a culture of observation, mistrust, and defensive action. The heirloom, though small in size, had transformed the household into a microcosm of tension, intrigue, and psychological control.